To your show.
If you don't understand that the bank's incentive is to lend as much money as possible without any repercussions, because the only way they make money is with lots of lending or gambling, effectively, and everybody else's incentive is to try not to get screwed, and yet the Congress is feeding the money to those who have a directly adverse incentive. They make money by screwing over pensioners and borrowers, and our Congress is making that more possible, not less possible. How did we find ourselves in this situation?
Well, I think the fundamental problem is campaign finance reform. I'm not trying to change the subject here, but I do want to point out that we wouldn't have this problem except for the fact that lobbyists hand out $5,000 checks.
Bill, explain in the simplest sense why it is Alan Greenspan is so directly responsible for creating this con.
Well, first of all, let me say, Dylan, yours was one of the most succinct explanations of the problem that I've heard, so that was quite a good send-up that you did. Because Greenspan is ultimately responsible because he was the one who put rates at a level that was too low and then refused in the face of all evidence to do anything to try to retard the potential for an asset bubble. He was in denial about the equity bubble and then turned around and created the the credit/housing bubble, and to this day refuses to accept any responsibility for it. When prices are held at an artificially too low of level, by putting too much money in the system, that money seeks its way out into other places, and and it will end up creating a bubble. And the more leverage used in the bubble, the more dangerous it becomes. Greenspan not only made the interest rates too low, he advocated the policies and he cheerled for the housing bubble, for instance. He made a speech where he tried to explain why housing could not possibly be a bubble. So it was not just his conduct of monetary policy, it was the speeches he made, and he was held in such high regard, other people adopted his behavior and his philosophies.
Congressman Grayson, you mentioned campaign finance reform and the need to get the lobbyists out because the bank lobbyists, $344 million, a cut of the action on the con goes to Congress. Are you as cynical as that would suggest, that basically Congress knows that they should create transparency and capital requirements, which would end the ability for there to be a con like this, but refuses to do so because they're afraid of losing those checks?
I think it's worse than that, actually. We lived through an economic disaster, and now we're slowly recovering from it. We lost 20% of our national wealth in 18 months, the last 18 months of the Bush administration, and housing topped out 3.5 years ago, not just in Florida, but around the country, and nobody has been held responsible, not Alan Greenspan, not anybody else. In Japan, they have a way different solution to these kinds of problems. It's called Harry-Carry.
I think what confuses people at this point, Congressman, and having been talking about this incessantly for a few years now, most people, if you look at the polling, understand at least enough of this to know that Congress works for the banks, not for the American people, and yet Congress still seems phenomenally willing to drag its feet in addressing this. Harry-Carry may be interesting or nice. We're probably not going to see it. We live in a democracy where we're told we elect people who look out for our interests, and yet the same people are creating laws that allow this group to con the American people out of the largest transfer of wealth in the history of the world with no consequences. Are you suggesting special interests have so much control that our government literally is willing to facilitate that level of wealth transfer with no consequences?
I think that's a fair statement, and I would add to what was said before that we've got the creation of the idea of too big to fail under Alan Greenspan. We've got him gunning the economy through the Y2K money supply increase that led to economic disaster within 4 months. He made mistake after mistake after mistake, and what we never hear from any of these people is, I'm sorry. We don't even hear that. And I think it's because the system is enslaved. Yes, that's right. And the Senate bill, unfortunately, does that. The Senate bill takes whatever possibility there is of somebody who's actually looking out for the consumer and puts that in, of all places, the Federal Reserve as the one responsible to do that. The Federal Reserve, which is actually run by big banks, it's governed by big banks. They choose the people who occupy the seats of power in each regional bank. And yet we're going to be giving them more power.
Go ahead, Bill. Dylan, you know, if the American banking system, if the directors and higher-ups there were held personally liable for some of the problems, as they are in Brazil, for instance, and as they used to be in this country 70 years ago, then you might get a level of oversight on the banks and have them pursue policies that we would wind up finding less odoriferous. It's not that difficult. You just have to make the guys in charge personally liable for some of the problems, and some of this behavior would go away.
Any chance of that, Congressman?
Yes, in fact, we're working on a bill to do exactly that, and we've examined what happens in other countries when they make the kinds of mistakes we've seen the last few years in America. And it's not a pretty picture for the people in charge, either in Wall Street or in the Capitol.
Listen, Congressman, we appreciate your efforts on our behalf to correct for the con and get the money back and fix the system. And Bill, thank